there, this is Jenny from the Sewing Palace in Helena, Montana. Today we're going to be working on our Santa's Village Saturday sampler from Thimble Creek Quilts. It's this pattern right here. And we're working on block 9 already. It's June of 2020. We haven't been able to have classes in the store due to the pandemic. We've missed you very, very much, but I hope you enjoy this online quilt along so you can learn how to make your block. For block 9, you'll want to collect a couple of supplies. This month we're using 4 different fabrics. We're using a medium colored fabric, which is cream. It will be paired with a dark green to make the star in the center. We have background fabric, which is light, and then a little accent fabric of red that goes in the corners. You'll also want a couple of notions. So I've got a 3.5 by 12.5 inch ruler to cut some strips and pieces. I've also got a specialty ruler from Bloc Loc. It's the Flying Geese 3 by 6. And then I've also got the Bloc Loc 3.5 inch finished half square triangle. So that is another specialty ruler that will be helpful for this project. Then I'm using my favorite starch blend, which is Best Press and Terreal Magic. I wanted you to know that you can buy Best Press in gallons. You can also buy Terreal Magic in larger quantities. And then you can mix those together in an atomizer bottle or a mister bottle to create your starch alternative. I use 2/3 amount of Best Press and then 1/3 of amount of Terreal Magic. You'll also want your pattern, which is Thimble Creek Quilts, and it's called Santa's Village. I use a woolly pressing mat, or a fill thread, a nice sharp needle, and a great sewing machine to get you started. Let's look at our block. It's a 12-inch finished block. The grid is a 3-inch grid, so each unit finishes at 3 inches. So this is 3-inch finished, 3-inch finish, and there and there. So 3, 6, 9, and 12. That makes a 12-inch finished block. These units in the corner are half square triangles. The ones on the side are a double width, single height, or here it's the other direction. Those are 3 inches by 6 inches. That's a Flying Geese unit. And then we have half square triangle units that make the pinwheel in the center. So your units will finish at 3 inches, 3.5 unfinished, or the Flying Geese unit will be 3.5 by 6.5 unfinished, which means a 3-inch by 6-inch Flying Geese unit that is finished. Our center pinwheel fabric is made up out of fabric A and B. So that is the cream stars and the green, or whatever you want to use out of your stash. If you're following the directions, you would cut those in 3 7/8 and then cut them diagonally and then sew them back together with a 1/4 inch seam. We're going to cut them just a little bit larger and trim them down with a Bloc Loc. So to get this unit, I'll need 2 4 1/4 of the cream fabric and 2 4 1/4 of the green. So I'm going to cut those right now. I've pre-starched my fabrics, and now I'm laying the 2 fabrics right sides together so that they're touching right sides together. And I need to cut 2 4 1/4. So in the interest of time and efficiency, I'm going to cut through all these layers at once, and I'm going to cut some squares that are 4 1/4 inches with my ruler. My first cut is going to be on the top and over on this side, and I need to make sure that underneath my ruler I have more than 4 1/4 inches of fabric, so I can make sure I can trim it down to 4 1/4. So I'm going to cut there and there. I'll then use my ruler and make sure that I am on the 4 1/4 inch mark. It will have an elbow right in the corner, and then 4 1/4 over on the side, and I'll trim here and here. While the fabrics are stilling right sides together, I will mark diagonally from point to point on the 2 units, and then on the sides of the line I will sew a 1/4 inch on each side, and we'll press and square them up. For the half square triangles, I've marked them diagonally from point to point with a fabric friendly pen. They're laying right sides together, and then you're going to sew a 1/4 inch on each side of the line using a 1/4 inch presser foot. So you're going to sew on each side. You'll also do the same thing with the red and the cream units that you cut. Those were 4 1/4. You're going to mark them diagonally from point to point, and you're going to sew those. You can chain piece all of these units together by sewing one side before you clip your threads and take it out of the machine. You then feed in the next unit, and there'll be a chain of thread joining them together. When you get the chain done, you can go the other direction. Now that I have my half square units pressed, I'll trim them down. This ruler is a 3 1/2 inch ruler that will square up to 3 1/2. I have my seam pressed towards the dark fabric, and when this locks in, it'll lock right in on that seam, and I'll square up all the way around the block. On to the next units, we're going to work on flying geese. So those are the units that are on the sides, and they're 3 1/2 by 6 1/2 unfinished. You'll notice that on one side there's one color, and on the other side there's another color. So we can't follow the faster ways of doing this by doing 4 at a time. You'll have to do traditional method of piecing them, because you'll always want to make sure when you're sewing this unit so that this color is always on the right hand side of the unit if it's facing this direction, and this dark color is on the other side. That way it will line up and start to create that pinwheel in the center. So you want to be conscious of that and take your time making sure you're sewing it to the right side. The difference is we're going to cut them a little bit differently because we're going to use the Bloc Loc method. In order to get your cuts accurately, Bloc Loc has produced a document that I'll put a link for it in the description of the video, and it will tell you what size squares and rectangles to cut when you're making one flying geese unit at a time. So over to the left, there's the finished flying geese unit size. We're working with a 3 inch by 6 inch finished. So the units that will make up the squares will measure 3 3/4 by 3 3/4. The rectangle unit is 3 3/4 by 6 3/4. So out of our background fabric, that is going to be this rectangle. And then our color fabric, or the cream and the green for this example, are going to be the 3 3/4 inch units. If you're looking at your block itself, when you're looking at the flying geese units, we'll need 1, 2, 3, 4 of the 3 3/4 out of one color, and then 1, 2, 3, 4 out of the other color. So as we deviate from the pattern, this will be another way to make flying geese. I'm going to cut my 3 3/4 inch squares out of my one color of fabric, which is the tan. So I'm going to fold it, and I've got it folded so that I'm cutting 4 layers. I've got it in half, it's already starched, and then in half again. And then I'm going to cut a piece that's a little bit bigger than 3 3/4 and then square it up. So my first cut's going to be on the right and on the top. And then I'll rotate my fabric and cut the other sides. I'll do the same thing with my green. So I've got that folded several times, so I'm cutting through several layers, and I need 4 3 3/4 by 3 3/4 inch squares out of this color as well. This is my large piece of background fabric. I already have it pre-starched, and I do need to get 4 rectangles that are 3 3/4 by 6 3/4, and then I need to get 2 pieces that are 4 1/4 inch square for the corners. So my first thing is I'm going to starch it, then I'm going to lay it so that I am going to cut through 4 layers. I'm going to plan on cutting my big piece first, which is 3 3/4 by 6 3/4. So you just want to be careful to be minimal in how much you're trimming and squaring up, because you don't have a lot of wiggle room on this piece of fabric. So I'm going to cut here. This is my excess, and then here. Then I'm going to rotate the fabric and trim it down to 6 3/4 by 3 3/4. Then out of the leftovers, I'll cut my 2 4 1/4 inch squares. From my leftover piece, I have this large piece here. That's going to be paired with the red fabric to make some half square triangle units for the corners. So those are those pieces there. Again, those need to be 4 1/4 by 4 1/4. So you can stack those. Now I need to fold this the other way in order to get enough width out of that. And now I can cut through all those layers to get 2 out of each. So a total of 4, 2 reds and 2 creams. All right, you have your basic units together. We have half square triangles in the center forming a pinwheel, half square triangles on the outside corners. These units will be flying geese units. So I want you to take some time to be very careful about where you place them, because one side of the goose will be one color and the other side of the goose will be another color. So if I were to lay this to make a flying geese unit, the green would go above the green fabric and the cream above that. These are done with a flip and sew method. So what you do is you line them up right sides together and you sew diagonally from point to point and press. Then you do the same thing for the other side. If you look closely, this is the same unit as that. This color is always on the right hand side of this unit. If you make the reverse of this, your block won't have a pinwheel effect that continues into a star. It'll just have a little bit more of a patchwork look. So when you make your flying geese units, take some more time to make sure you have which side is definitive. The other tip I have is to form your pinwheel block, because then you can kind of lay out your block and figure out which way it goes. Pinwheels are not all the same, because you can also make a pinwheel with the dark going the other direction, and it still is correct. It will just have a different orientation. Then you would also want to reorganize so that the right fabrics are above to form that star point. So just take your time making your flying geese. All right, I've laid out my pinwheel in the center. I've got a friction pen and a ruler, and I've marked on the wrong side of the fabric diagonally from point to point. So I'm going to lay these fabrics right sides together. My background rectangle is there. And I'm going to lay this right sides together so that when I take this to my sewing machine, it's already marked and it's on the right side. I know it's going to be right next to that piece. So I'm going to get all those pieces ready, like so. Then when I get ready to sew them, I can just pull them off my layout board and I'm sure I'm sewing the right side. I've taken my fabric right off my layout board, and I know exactly which side and the direction it needs to be sewn because it's marked, and I will sew right on the line. So when I'm making the flying geese units, those are going to be right on the marked line. Once you've sewn on that marked line, this will flip over and line up with the edge. These pieces are excess. If you would like to make something else with those, you can go back and sew with a larger seam and just turn this into some scrappy half square triangles. So before you cut it off, you can put it back into the bed of your machine and sew it, and then you'll have something usable out of your waist, which is a half square triangle, and then also the flying geese. So we'll cut those up next. So step 1 was trimming away the excess with a 1/4 inch seam. I'm using my Bloc Loc ruler because there's already a 1/4 inch mark on this. So I can line that up on my marked line and trim that away. Then I'll press that out. The other piece that I had sewn was this little guy here. You can trim that down, and then you have a usable scrap that is a half square triangle unit. After you've trimmed away the excess, you can then lay your green fabric right side down, pre-mark that diagonally from point to point, and you're going to sew so that that forms a V. So you already know which direction it needs to go. You can pre-mark your line ahead of time, and then you'll sew from point to point. Again, if you want to do something fun with the excess, you can sew that little extra seam while it's still sitting there and have an extra little half square triangle. Now that you've sewn your green, same thing, you're going to trim that down so that there's a 1/4 inch seam allowance. You can also trim down your scrap if you made that into a usable piece so that it's a 1/4 inch seam. You'll press this out, and then you're ready to square it up using the Bloc Loc ruler. I have my Flying Geese unit, and the specialty ruler that I'm going to use right now is the 3" by 6" finished Flying Geese by Bloc Loc. It has routered out edges on the inside that will lock right into that seam, so it'll be perfect. So that'll lock in. You'll get a 1/4 inch reveal here. You'll also get points that go exactly to the point, and it'll also measure exactly what you need it to measure, which is 3.5 by 6.5. I just am trimming a little bit. That's what the math figured out on that chart, was just to make it a tiny bit bigger so that when you square it up, it is got a little bit to trim off all around the edge, but enough to make it just perfect. So there's our unit, a 3" by 6" finished Flying Geese unit. Okay, you're almost there. You'll need to make some half square triangles that go in the corner, the red and the cream. They're made exactly like the center half square triangles. If you're following the directions, you could do that method, or you could do the method that we did today and square up with a Bloc Loc ruler. You'll then want to sew these in rows. So you'll have a row here and one on the side, and then you'll sew your pinwheel together. This can get a little bulky here with all the seams coming together. You can fan that seam out or press the seams open to help with that. You can also use a product that's called Flatter, and it's not a starch, it just helps flatten the fabric, and you can spray that centerpiece, press it on a woolly pressing mat and let it cool, and you'll get it nice and flat. So then you'll sew this row together, and then you sew the two sides on, so you'll be done with your block. It should measure 12.5 inches unfinished, and it is block 9 already from Santa's Village. I'm glad you joined us today to make our block. Please like and subscribe to our videos. We have lots of great ones on our channel. We look forward to seeing you in the shop. We're in Helena, Montana. Thanks for joining me today. This is Jenny from the Sewing Palace. Bye-bye.